We are back talking about Survivor 41. Last night we got episode 5, and now it is time to roll out the power rankings once again. Now, obviously, this is an interesting point in the season, as based on the coming attractions for next episode, it sounds like we are about to get a major shift in the game, whether it's a merge or a swap or some kind of new twist to really shake things up. I know we're about to get something pretty interesting with this next episode. So I think now is a good time to really assess where these players are and what their chances are moving forward. So, starting things off at number 13, we have the boot of the episode. We have Genie. Now, from a gameplay perspective, this wasn't too interesting of a boot. She gets the idea of looking for the Beware advantage early on and even manages to find it, but is pretty transparent with Ricard and Chantel during the process. After she finds it, Ricard and Chantel literally convince her to not open it, and she actually agrees to this. I think it was a mistake for her to let Ricard and Chantel be aware that she was looking for it in the first place. But even worse is that she allowed them to convince her to put it back. Considering there were only three people on the tribe at this point, and she was clearly in the bottom, I think that it was a mistake for her to just give up in an idol. And not long afterwards, Ricard and Jantel find it together and decide to open it, keeping it for themselves. And then they tell Jeannie their plan to say the message at the immunity challenge, getting her to think that was just to fake out the other tribes. And from what we saw in the show, at least, Genie accepts it at face value and never suspects that one of them might actually have the idol. So, none that's particularly great. And then after Uo loses the immunity challenge, it's pretty clear to me that she's a goner. However, we do see her strategize a bit. She tries selling Ricard this plan to blindside Chantel, when in reality she's voting for Ricard. And Ricard pretends to be on board with this when he's actually planning to vote for Genie. And while Chantel's presented as a swing vote in this episode, I never had much doubt that she would side with Ricard here. At Tribal, Jeannie considers using her shot in the dark, but ultimately backs out, thinking Chantel will be on her side, and is voted out 2-1. Overall, I feel like Jeannie played pretty much how I thought she would, which isn't very good. She's left out of the Sarah vote, she's blindsided the Brad vote and loses a closer ally there. She's spared at the JD vote due to her being perceived as a more loyal option, and then she's taken out right afterwards. Now, while she was prone to lashing out, such as right after the Brad vote, she was alright socially and she seemed well liked. The problem is that she was never in the core majority alliance and she played way too passively. I think she gets partially screwed over by the fact that Ua kept losing immunity, but even when she had opportunities to save herself, like keeping the idol or using her shot in the dark, she didn't take them, which wasn't great. And even if she made the merge, I don't think she would have turned it up. As I've said earlier, if she made the merge, I think she would have made it to around Final 7, maybe Final 6, only to be picked off for being too likable. While I don't think she was completely lacking strategically, I think she's way too trusting, she was too passive in the game, and she wasn't really willing to adapt to the modern game, so I had to put her here at number 13, but I think she was an interesting enough character on the season. So that's it for Genie. Now we're moving on to number 12, and this person's actually dropped a couple spots. Now, it'll be a bit weird talking about this person as this person has gotten a bit more content than a couple of the other people we'll be talking about soon. So, at number 12 here, I actually have Sydney. Now, Sydney has been getting a consistent presence on the show. I mean, just in this episode, she got a confessional talking about her fishing and her wanting to be a mermaid. But really, despite her getting this consistent presence, we haven't really learned much about her or seen her in a really positive light. I feel like a lot of her content has been pretty aimless, but we still have been getting it a lot. And at this point, I feel like she will be the merge boo of the season, and that's actually the reason why I have her this low. She has been getting consistent content, but a lot of it has been pretty aimless. I mean, in the early episodes, her content was mainly about Nasir, but she's been flip flopping about him, which is very troubling. We know she's in an alliance with Danny and Deshawn, but none of those three have really gone to talk about how close they are on the show. And the rest of the content, particularly what we got in this episode, doesn't have much substance to it. Despite this, I feel like we've been getting this consistent serving in order to make the first vote at the merge, usually a pretty momentous point in the game, more satisfying. And considering how little positivity or personal content we've gotten from Sydney, I imagine that's the main reason we've been seeing her each and every episode. Gameplay wise, it makes sense as well. I mean, the way I see the merge happening, whenever it comes, is that I see Luvu the original Luvu members being targeted due to their numbers, and I see Yase and Ua trying to mount an attack against them. And we already have several Luvu members, namely Heather and Nasir, that would flip in order to get rid of Sydney. So, and I feel like they have an incentive to get rid of Sydney as well, as she is the less threatening of people like Danny, and she doesn't have the connections that Deshawn has with the other tribe. So I think in that event, it's very possible that Sydney will be one of the first few to go once the merge hits. So I feel like with all these factors in mind, I don't have much confidence in Sydney to get past the mid game. And I feel like that confidence is the reason why I have her here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11. We're actually going to the person that many people would expect to have near the bottom, and that is Erika. Now, Erika was pretty invisible in this episode, but she was talked about quite a bit. In this case, Danny and Deshawn still want to target her for wanting to target their ally, Sydney. But this episode presented the possibility that Nasir could be on board for this plan as well. Now, granted, it's not entirely clear whether Nasir would go through with it, and I actually don't think it'd be a good move for Nasir to vote Erica at this point. But that is happening nonetheless, and it's not great for Erica gameplay wise. And considering she's been a background character to this point, I don't think she's winning the game. With that said, the reason I have her above Sydney this week is because I actually think she might survive, like that when Luvu eventually has to go to tribal. I mean, we know that we're going to get this major shakeup the next episode, and whether that is a merge or a swap, or even if the tries stay the same, I think there are factors that would cause Erica to stay. I mean, Nasir has an idol now that is activated. You know, like I could see him trying to work with Heather to and Erica to save Erica and instead try to get out Sydney instead. And obviously, if a swap were to happen, then I think in that case, Erica would be less likely to be targeted than Sydney. Is it possible Erica goes home? Definitely. And like I said, I don't think she's winning the game regardless. But I think with the way things have been going, I could definitely see her staying a couple more rounds than Sydney. So that's why I have her here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have the other person that's been pretty invisible to this point, and that is Heather. Now, again, I've been lumping together Erica and Heather a lot, as both of them have been pretty invisible. And actually, Heather was more invisible in this episode than Erica, as at least Erica was talked about, whereas Heather didn't really get that, and she sat out of the challenge yet again. So, again, like Erica, I don't think Heather has any shot of winning at this point. But the reason I have her above Erica is because I think Heather's more likely to survive the next couple rounds than Erica. Like with Erica, there is definitely a chance that she goes home the next time or whenever Luvu goes to tribal. And the same thing with Sydney. Whereas with Heather, I don't really see that happening. She hasn't really been mentioned as a target. I feel like at this point in the game, people are fine just keeping her around, like to keep around as sort of a non threat, and through that, I think the fact that Heather can get further in the game than either Sydney or Erica is the reason why I at least have her above those two. But again, she has no chance of winning at this point. I don't really see how she gets the respect of the jury, even if she gets to the end. But again, there are at least possibilities for her moving forward in the game, so that's why I have her here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have someone that has been slipping a bit recently. I mean, I never thought this person had that great of a chance of winning in the first place, but I feel like this episode was particularly bad for him. So at number 9, I have Xander. Now, again, this was a pretty bad episode for him. I mean, he is still at the bottom of Yase, and throughout this episode, we really see him being portrayed as kind of foolish. I mean, he believes that he's in a tight alliance with Evie, when in reality, Evie is more loyal to the other women and he's on the outs. Back at camp, Tiffany and Liana search through his bag where they find both his idol and his extra vote, none of which is good. Evie then convinces him to tell Tiffany about his idol as a way to build trust with Tiffany. And he goes ahead and does that. But during the conversation, he lies about having only found it recently, despite saying the phrase at the last two challenges. In confessional, he says that it's Tiffany's job back home to forgive delinquents for lying, and walks away thinking she'll work with him out of pity. This is immediately undercut with Tiffany not only recognizes a lie, but saying at the end that she's more suspicious of him now that the conversation has happened. Edit wise, this is a terrible look for Xander and makes me think that he's dead at this point. Gameplay wise, he's still at the bottom, like I said, despite seeming to think that he's making inroads with Evie and Liana. Now his idol was activated and he could finally use his extra vote, but even that is endangered now that Liana has the knowledge of his power advantage. Considering that he is at the bottom of Yase and the women know about his advantages, Liana could easily take one of them away. Really, the only saving grace for him, gameplay wise, at this point, is that a major shakeup is about to happen. Like, what again, whether it's a merge or a swap, I think that shift in the game will give him opportunities to build new alliances and potentially do stuff to get himself off the bottom. I think he won't be the target at the merge. I don't think he'll be the first target per se. And I think there are opportunities for him to propel himself deeper into the game. But at this point, he's been so undercut in the edit where in earlier episodes, he's only been shown when he was absolutely needed. And in this episode, he was shown in almost a purely negative light. So at this point, I don't think he's winning the game, but I think there is potential for him to make a deep run. So I have him here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have someone who's jumped up a little bit. They had a pretty good episode on the whole, like not enough to really make me consider this person a winner candidate, but definitely a positive episode, enough to make me put him a little higher on the list. And we have Nasir. Now, obviously, this was a great episode for Nasir. I mean, first he's shown talking to Danny and Deshawn, where Deshawn pitches the plan of throwing the challenge. However, Nasir is completely against the idea. He feels like people that throw challenges aren't long for the game, which historically isn't exactly true, but again, he is shown in a positive light here. We get an interesting confessional from Danny where he says that he doesn't want to work with Nasir, but feels like he has to in order to keep the men's numbers strong. We'll talk about that more in a minute when we talk about Danny, but again, it's sort of interesting how Danny is open to working with Nasir for the time being, or at least feels like he has to. But as the scene continues, Nasir gets a good confessional talking about how he's been included in conversations. And while I question whether Nasir actually has an alliance with Danny and Deshawn, this entire scene is a boon for his edit and points to him gaining more influence in the game. So really, this was a positive thing for him on the whole. And sure enough, we see Danny and Deshawn capitulate to Nasir and agree to not throw the challenge. All that's great. Later on at the challenge, it's revealed that Nasir has found the Beware advantage at Luvu, which is a fantastic scene just from a television standpoint, but it's a great scene for Nasir's edit, where we get a flashback of him finding the advantage and talking about how his daughter helped him practice finding idols back home. All that's great. And in the end, Nasir is the one that wins the challenge for Luvu. So overall, this was a great episode for Nasir from an editing standpoint, with him getting a lot of positive content and content showing him becoming a bigger player. Even so, I don't think he's enough to make him a winner candidate. I feel like at this point he's being edited more as a fan favorite. He might make some moves down the stretch. He'll probably win some challenges post merge, but I don't think he's set up to get all the way to the end. From a pure game standpoint, it's good seeing him having some influence over Danny and Deshawn and stopping them from throwing the challenge while saying he'd be on board to vote for Erika should they lose. Now, if they do go to tribal, I think his best move is to get rid of Sydney, someone that's closely aligned with Danny and Sean, but also someone that has targeted him in the past. I think getting rid of Sydney would better his position among the Luvu members, even if a merge or big twist appears imminent now. Now, again, like down the stretch, I could see Luvu being targeted, and if that were the case, then Nasir might be in trouble, and his position with Danny and Sean might not matter that much anyway, but I don't think he'd be the first to be targeted from Luvu anyway. So I think he's good for for a decent chunk of the merge. But again, like Genie would have had she gotten to there, I think he will be someone that is targeted towards the end, either as a physical competitor or as someone that's too likable and would easily win a jury vote. So I have to put Nasir here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7. We actually have someone who, again, has dropped a bit. I mean, not too drastically, but I think now that we're getting towards the mid game, I think this person could be in some danger moving forward. So at number 7 here, we have Danny. Now, this was an interesting episode for Danny. We see him and Deshawn talking, and Deshawn once again pitches to him the idea of throwing the challenge in order to get rid of Erica. But now instead of simply talking about it in those terms, or in terms of lowering Luvu's threat level in the merge, he presents it as a men women thing. He talks about how he most of the boots recently have been men and that he's worried about the men being down in numbers of the merge. I thought that was an interesting confessional for Danny. We then get Nasir entering the picture, and Deshaun pitches the idea to him, only for Nasir to push back. Danny stays quiet during this part, but he does get a confessional talking about how he doesn't want to work with Nasir due to his unwillingness to throw challenges, but adds to Nasir as necessary for him moving forward in the game. And I thought that was an interesting confessional. I think like he is thinking in terms of this men woman thing, which is probably not the best look for him, but it is something at least. And ultimately, Danny and Deshaun back down from wanting to throw the challenge, largely because Nasir wants them to. So overall, Danny is still in the majority, and he still wants to vote out Erica, both as a men-woman thing and thinking that she has an idol. I find it interesting how in the last episode, however, Danny was hesitant about throwing the challenge and wasn't shown doing much to do so, even as he accepted Deshaun's plan. But now, Danny is much more open to throwing the challenge. Even so, the fact that he and Deshaun capitulated Nasir isn't the best look for Danny. While Nasir doesn't seem against the idea of voting out Erica should they lose, Nasir gets his way on not throwing the challenge. So not feeling great about Danny at this point, even if he's still in a good position game wise. Now, obviously, with this merge coming on soon, or switch up or whatever, I think again Luvu could be in a lot of trouble as they still have all six of their members on board. And I think in that case, Danny's side would probably be on the outs for that vote. I mean, I already mentioned how I think Sydney is the most likely person to be voted out at Luvu, but I think Danny could be in trouble too, as he seems to be the, at least, if not the leader, at least the figurehead of his alliance. Like I feel like Deshaun is probably more the person calling the shots, like in that alliance, but Danny is someone who a lot of people look up to, a lot of people respect, a lot of people think is the one running things. And I feel like he could be a big physical threat that could be targeted around the merge because of that. So I'm not feeling too great about Danny at this point. I mean, this episode didn't really do much to help me out, to help me see him as a winner per se. And with him entering a pretty dicey situation, I think, coming into the merge, unless he's able to get the Lubus to sit together, which I don't think is super likely. I think Danny will more likely be targeted like very soon afterwards. So even though he's in a good position now, I don't think it'll particularly last. So I have to leave him here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we're going to be talking about someone who I'll be honest, I never felt that great about this person in their chances. Like they never really jumped out to me on the edit, but is also someone that I never felt comfortable counting out. I feel like this person still technically has a chance to win and could be someone that just springs out of nowhere towards the end. But at number 6 here, I have Ricard. Now, this was an interesting episode for Ricard, of course. Obviously, this episode focused a lot on his relationship with Chantel. After Genie finds Beware Advantage, Ricard and Chantel convince her to put it back, only for the two of them to open it themselves. But before they do so, Chantel hands Ricard her extra vote, just in case the idol isn't activated before next tribal. Chantel is the one in possession of the Beware Advantage, so it's sort of dispersing the powers among the two. Ultimately, the idol is activated, but Uwa loses the challenge and Chantel is sent on the summit. I do want to mention a funny moment from the challenge where he shoots the sandbag in slow mo, only for it to miss the target. I mean, that was a pretty funny moment right there. But from this point on, I had little doubt that Genie was going home, but Ricard was her target going to the vote, which isn't particularly great. Once Chantel returns to camp, she tries to convince Ricard to hand the extra vote back to her. Ricard refuses, and the two of them have a pretty awkward exchange. Ricard reminds Chantel that she used the same pitch to get JD to hand over the extra vote earlier, and despite Chantel pushing back, Ricard stands his ground and gets to keep the extra vote. Obviously, the scene was put there to create some suspense over the vote, despite Genie being the clear boot. Now, considering the bulk of the episode was from Chantel's perspective, one could say that this paints Ricard in a negative light for not doing what Chantel wanted. Even so, I think it was wise of Ricard not cave. Moving forward, however, is a bit strange to map out for Ricard, and part of the reason why it's hard to really assess his chances. Him voting out Genie is the correct move, as Genie never liked him or seemed open to working with him. And I think for the short term at least, he and Chantel will continue working together despite the rift that we saw before this tribal. Even so, I think he's a dark horse at best to win. While he has been getting somewhat consistent content, mainly due to his tribe going to tribal, I don't feel like the show is propping him up as much as a lot of other players. At best, he might win the season due to the editors hiding him in the pre-merge. I mean, he definitely has strategic ability and the willingness to play to navigate the post-merge. But realistically, I think there are just better candidates to win based on the edit to this point. I don't feel like the edit has really done much to prop him up, and I feel like if he were to win, it would be more because the attention was diverted to these decoy winners that we'll be talking about soon. So I have to leave Ricard here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we are talking about someone who I was pretty high on, like, in definitely during some of the earlier episodes, but in recent episodes, this person has just been disappointing me with their lack of content. And at number 5 here, we have Liana. Now, around camp, she spends most of the time with Tiffany, and the two of them search through Xander's bag, where they find his Beware advantage and his extra vote. Later on in the episode, Liana is sent on the summit with Chantel, where the two of them bond over being women of color. But what struck me about this moment is how the bulk of the scene is from Chantel's perspective. You would think Liana would get more content here, as it is circumstantial for her, and Chantel would have more time to receive content back at camp as her tribe is going to tribal. But instead, Chantel gets all the focus here, talking about her mom, her rocky childhood, and becoming a pastor. And while I could say Liana builds a closer relationship with Chantel through this interaction, the fact that Liana barely gets anything from the summit is a net negative in my eyes. But through the summit, Liana receives the knowledge is power advantage. And while I think this is a pretty bad advantage from a production standpoint, I think this can be very useful for Liana's game, especially since she knows about Xander's extra vote and presumably his idol as well. I think she is in a decent position moving forward. However, as these last few episodes have been particularly disappointing for her, I feel like she has been slipping in my power rankings. Now, I don't think she's dead per se. I think she still has a decent shot. And again, with these decoy winners sort of floating around, I think she has the potential to get a story moving forward. Like she talked about how not like she didn't take risks and how she may have made $1 million mistake by not going on the advantage a couple episodes ago. I think there is potential for the knowledge is power advantage to really give her redemption here. And I think if she gets out Xander, that would be particularly poetic on her end and definitely something that would increase her chances from an editing standpoint. But as it stands now, I mean, I don't feel super confident in her, or at least not as confident as I did earlier in the season. She's in a good position gameplay wise right now. I mean, she is in the alliance with the three women, and I think going into the merge or swap or whatever, though that group is very poised to do well and build bonds and really control the game. But with the way things stand right now, I don't feel comfortable putting Liana above number 5, so I have to leave her here. Now we're moving on to number 4, and once again, we are at the highest ranked Luvu member still in the game. And just like last week, the highest ranked Luvu member is Deshawn. Now, like Danny, this was an interesting episode for Deshawn. His main content in the episode is trying to once again get people to throw the challenge. We first see him pitching the plan to Danny, who appears a lot more open to the idea now that he was last episode. His plan of voting out Erika appears the same, with him thinking she has an idol, and he does a good job convincing Danny by presenting it as a men women issue, with men being down in the numbers at the moment. But then Nishan tries convincing Nasir to get on board, and Nasir is completely against throwing challenges. We see Deshaun try to make the case, but Nasir doesn't budge. And ultimately, the group agrees to not throw the challenge mainly. Even so, they also agree that Erica has the idol, which isn't true, and that they should target her in the event that they do lose. Overall, we see Deshaun be the main strategist for his alliance and the one putting the plan together. The fact that this plan is sorted by Nasir isn't the best look for Deshaun, but again, he is the main strategist of the group. but while still having a figurehead in Danny, which I think is a good thing for his game. It's also interesting how he and Danny are shown working with Nasir despite being told by Sydney that he's targeting them. While it's possible this cooperation only exists in the context of throwing the challenge and targeting Erika, it's still interesting to see. But again, Deshawn remains in a decent position, at least within the Luvus, even if they haven't been to travel yet. But as I talked about earlier, I think come the merge, I think they could be in a lot of trouble. Like if Sydney and Danny get targeted. Now, if there's anything positive for me to say about Deshawn, is that I feel like of those core three in that core alliance, Stan, Deshawn, and Sydney, Deshaun's probably the best poised to survive those early rounds if Luvu is targeted. I think a lot of that comes from his natural skill at the game. I think some of that also comes from the relationship he established with Evie back on the summit. Now, I remember at the time that this relationship didn't seem like it would amount to much. I mean, I feel like we barely heard anything from Deshaun's end on how he feels about Evie and whether he'd be open to working with them. But I feel like now, as time passes, I feel like if Luvu is targeted and Deshaun is on the outs, that could be his way to survive the votes and for him to potentially get back in the majority. So I think that is something you can at least say about him. But I feel like, again, the top three people have better cases for why they would be the winner of the season. I mean, it's definitely possible for Deshaun to win. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't be this high on the list. But I feel like for the time being, I have to leave him here at number four. Now we're moving on to number three, and it's actually the same top three that I had last week. Now it's just a matter of the order because I'll be honest, like it's my opinion on this top three has actually changed a bit. I mean, and the person we'll be talking about next is someone that I'm starting to see more of a case for this person actually winning. But there are some weird elements to this person's edit that keeps me from having them higher on the list. So at number three, we have Tiffany. Now, this was, again, another interesting episode for her. So right away, she reveals that she doesn't trust Evie, as she believes their alliance with Xander is genuine. However, Evie explained shortly beforehand that they're just trying to make Xander comfortable for the time being. Tiffany still doesn't understand how Xander's idol works, and she, along with Liana, search through Xander's bag. Liana finally explains to Tiffany how the idol works, and the two agree to vote out Xander at the next opportunity, assuming the idol still hasn't been activated. Xander then decides to tell her about the idol as a way of building trust with her, and we get a lot of narration from Tiffany during the scene. But most importantly, she recognizes that Xander lied about finding it recently, when in reality he found it very early on. And despite Xander walking away thinking she'll pity him and actually be willing to work with him, Tiffany doubles down on her suspicion against Xander. So overall, I feel like this episode is very emblematic of Tiffany's edit as a whole. She continues to establish herself as a major contender, and she has a decent amount of positivity and a decent amount of content to explain her perspective on the game. But on the other hand, there's bumps along the way, and I feel like a lot of her reads are pretty bad. I mean, in this episode, here she is thinking that Evie is closer to Xander than they are to the three women, when Evie literally just said that they're closer to the three women than they are to Xander. I mean, and in this episode, I mean, she was talking to Xander to try to get information from him, and that was portrayed in a positive light. So I feel like it's a again continues to be a very mixed bag for her. I mean, she didn't understand how the idol worked up until this episode. That's not great. I mean, again, Tiffany is someone that's been kind of all over the place edit wise, but the one constant is that we have been learning more about her. She has been getting a consistent presence on the show, and we are led to believe that she'll be a major force and a major character in the season moving forward. I feel like if Evie and Chantel prove to be decoy winners, given how blatant their edits have been to this point, Tiffany is the next most likely winner. I mean, she has the content to where she would be a satisfying winner and a relatively surprising one considering how obvious Evie and Chantal have been. But at the same time, I could see her being a losing finalist as we've seen her make some pretty bad reads and we've seen her make some pretty questionable decisions. And I think that could be set up for her being a pretty messy player, someone that makes a lot of big moves but burns people on the way or leads people to believe that she doesn't know what she's doing or not respect her. And in the end, she would lose. So I could really see it going either way for Tiffany. But I think through seeing her on the season, I think it's becoming increasingly clear that she'll at least make it to the end. And that's more than I can say than a lot of these other players. I mean, the fact that I can very well see her at Final Tribal Council is a big reason why she's as high as she is. And I think, given how active she's been in the game and how much we've seen her perspective on the game, I think it's very possible that, like, even if she doesn't win, she's someone that will play an active game. And if she is able to play an active game and get the respect of the jury, then she wins. So that's, so this dichotomy between her getting positive content, her getting some negative content, I mean, it's kind of hard for me to parse together. But I feel like the fact that I feel comfortable with her chances of at least getting to the end is a big reason why I have her here at number three. Now we're moving on to the top two, and yes, it is the same top two as last week and really a lot of the season as a whole. But I'll be honest, after this week, like, I'm starting to feel less confident about both of them. I've alluded to this earlier in the video, but I'm starting to see, like, at least one of these two being a decoy winner, if not both of them. So that's what makes it really difficult for me to have them this high. But given how prevalent they've been in the season and how blatant of a winner's edit these people have been getting, it's forced me to at least put them this high on the list. But I should say that despite them still being high on the list, my overall assessment of their chances of winning has gone down in the last couple weeks. And I would not be surprised if one or both of these people end up being decoy winners. So, with that out of the way, at number two, we have Evie. Now, this was an interesting episode for Evie. The episode focused on their relationship with Xander and how they're making Xander feel comfortable, as if he's in a tight duo with them. In reality, though, Evie is more loyal to the three women and explains this in confessional. Even so, Tiffany believes that Evie is more loyal to Xander, which isn't the best look for Evie in my eyes. But then afterwards, Evie convinces Xander to approach Tiffany and tell her about his idol. And Xander goes along with this, telling Tiffany about the idol, but also making Tiffany more suspicious of him moving forward. So overall, I would still consider this a positive episode for Evie. They are shown being the center of the tribe and in a great position moving it into the next week's shakeup, whether that's a merge or a swap. I think when the merge does come, Evie is in a great position with them being on Yase, and I think Yase and Ua are in a prime position to target the original Lubu members should it come to it. But we also know that Evie at least established a connection with Deshawn during the summit, which I think could be very beneficial to Evie in the post merge. Now, again, the big reason why I'm starting to have reservations about Evie is the decoy winner argument. I mean, that's a big reason why I don't have them higher on the list. Now, to be fair, the last few episodes have been a cooldown period for them, which is good. I mean, definitely takes attention away from their big first two episodes. But again, the concern is still there. Not to mention that Tiffany not trusting Evie does open up the possibility of a crack or a flip down the line between those two. I still think Evie is in a great position gameplay wise coming to the merge, or again, whatever happens next week. And if they get to the end, they should win a jury vote. But if they end up being a decoy winner and take out mid merge, I wouldn't be surprised at all. So again, it's sort of tough for me to assess, but I have to put them this high simply because they have been getting more or less a traditional winner's edit. I mean, their first two episodes were pretty big, but then they've sort of cooled down. Like, had a pretty quiet episode three, but in the last two episodes, they've been getting a confessional talking about their game and sort of checking up on them. So, again, sort of along the lines of a traditional winner's edit, but the decoy winner argument still stands. So that's sort of making me hesitate to put him higher. And I feel like I am kind of hedging my bets a bit if they do end up going home, like, but I want to be fully transparent and say that I see that possibility happening. But if this does end up being more of a traditional winner edit style season, then Evie has a really good shot of winning this game. So because of that, I have them here at number two. Now we're moving on to number one, and surprise, surprise, it's the same number one as last week, and that is Chantel. Now, again, same with Evie. Full disclaimer, I do start to see more of the decoy winner argument for Chantel now after seeing this episode. I thought Evie, it became pretty noticeable from early on, the possibility of her being a decoy winner. But I think the last few episodes have really opened my eyes to the possibility of Chantel also being a decoy winner, but I'll talk about that more in a minute. Let's just talk about the episode first. So, obviously, this is a massive episode for Chantel. We start off with her and Ricard convincing Genie not to open the Beware advantage, only for her to open it herself. She then gives Ricard the extra vote as a form of his insurance in case the idol isn't activated. I thought this was a good move, as an idol is more powerful than an extra vote, and giving it to Ricard ensures she isn't too threatening, but more on that in a bit. Later on, Ua loses the immunity challenge, but she is sent to the summit and the idol is activated. On the summit, she spends a lot of time with Liana talking about their experience as women of color. But really, this entire scene props up Chantel as she spends a lot of time talking about her mom, becoming a pastor, and what this experience means for her. All of that was pretty good and further cements her as a major character on the season. Back at camp, she's in a great position as she's surrounded by two people that are targeting each other, leaving her as a swing vote. Now, I thought it was pretty clear from the edit that she was going to stay with Ricard, which I know some people question as Genie is more likely to remain loyal moving forward, but I don't necessarily see it as a bad move on Chantel's end. I think Ricard, while he is more likely to flip in the future, is someone that's a bigger strategic threat than she is, so it's useful to have a target in front of her. And considering her ability to build bonds with people like Liana, I don't think Ricard is necessarily her only option moving forward. But then we get to what I think is the first major knock against her game when she goes to Ricard and tries to get the extra vote back from him after she already has an idol. It made no sense for Ricard to do so, especially after what happened to JD, and I feel like her pressing the issue may have done more harm than good to their relationship, so that's not particularly great. In the end, it doesn't matter as Genie is voted out, but overall, I still see Chantel as a strong contender. I mean, she has gotten a pretty prominent edit to this point and has demonstrated, like Evie, to be a big player. Even so, I'm starting to develop similar questions over whether she is just a decoy winner as well. Because at the beginning of the season, I thought Evie was getting way too much content, while Chantel was laying her groundwork a bit more quietly. But now it's kind of reversed to where Evie is quietly laying groundwork, while Chantel is exploding in airtime. And I think it's starting to make me lower my opinion on both their chances. Although I think both Chantel and Evie are still pretty securely the top two picks. And I would have Chantel above Evie due to the fact that, again, Chantel was a bit quieter earlier on and has only more recently gotten this explosion in content, while Evie had this big explosion right at the beginning, but has receded since then. So, again, I think the two of them have the most blatant and more traditional winner edits, and I wouldn't be surprised if either of them won. But I think again, this last episode and to some extent the last week beforehand really opened my eyes to that both of them potentially being decoy winners. And again, if both of them end up losing, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And like I think there is a chance that someone like Tiffany or Deshawn could pull it out at the end. Again, I'm here to say that I'm not discounting that possibility. But considering that they have the strongest edits to this point and they have the best position game wise at this point, I feel like I have to put them at numbers one and two respectively. And because of that, they are my top two moving forward. But I would just wanted to say that while they are still the top two, my opinions of their games are sort of falling to earth a little bit. So there's that at least. And there we go. That will do it for this week of Survivor 41 Power Rankings. Now, obviously, with the coming attraction next week, I mean, we're expecting to get a shake up in the game. I mean, I mean, it could be a merge, it could be a trade swap, it could be a one world situation. Like they didn't really make it super clear, but I think regardless of what happens, I think a lot of what I say still stands. I mean, maybe you'll adjust some short term projections, but I think based on the edit we've been getting, like the long term projections will probably still hold for me. So I don't think it'll affect things too much, but it'll still be pretty interesting to see. So with that out of the way, yeah, that'll do it for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed. See ya.